Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give everyone a minute to come on in and find their seats, their virtual seats, and we'll go ahead and get started in about a minute or two. All right, everyone. Welcome to New Models of Collaboration and welcome to the BARI Conference 2021, Building Back Smarter. We really appreciate everyone being here. And I'm going to pass along to our moderator, Cesar McDowell, Professor Cesar McDowell over at MIT.
Thank you, David. Hi, and good morning, everyone. I can't say it's good to see everyone because I can't see everyone, but it's really good to see the panel and have us all here. Yeah, my name is Cesar McDowell. I'm a professor at MIT in the Department of Studies and Planning, and it's really exciting to be here with this panel. What we're going to do is I'm going to have everyone go around real quick and just kind of introduce themselves. Then we have a series of short videos to show you, and then we're going to open up and have a conversation among ourselves, really looking at this issue of thinking about collaboration, and particularly what it means in relationship to creating connections between governments, the public sector, the private sector, particularly when we're dealing around these issues of technology, the uses of technology and data and information to make positive change for the future. And so with that, I'm actually going to, my prompt for your introduction is just tell us your name, your organization, and like one thing, just one, okay? One very short thing that just lets us know where you are today. Like, are you really present? Are you here? What's going on? What's on the top of mind for you today? Okay, and we're gonna actually start with Eric.
All right, hi Cesar. Hi everyone. My name is Eric Gordon, and I am, at the moment, I'm a visiting professor in the Department of Comparative Media Studies and Writing at MIT, and I am also hold a professorship at Emerson College, where I direct the engagement lab there. And my, not sure exactly how to respond to your prompt, but what I will say is that at the moment, I am trying to, where I am today is I'm trying to get on the road after this panel to Vermont. So I'm sort of thinking about how I'm going to pack and get out of here as soon as I can. But I'm here, very much here.
Yeah, thank you for great modeling, because I think we have to recognize we're all holding a lot of things all the time when we're in these spaces. And so just kind of, we can recognize it and say that's okay, right? Matthew?
Yeah, that's right. And I have to say, looking outside, I'm envious of your plans there, Eric. That sounds like a great weekend. My name is Matthew N.K. Smith. I'm the principal data scientist at the City of Boston. And I work with the citywide analytics team, touching all the various departments all around the city on projects all over the place. Where I am today, it's Friday. Enjoyed a good week, kind of digging into the collaboration that I'm going to talk about this afternoon. So I'm feeling optimistic about the future, especially in particular with the, you'll get a little bit of a teaser here, the the project I'm working on involves the cities of Montreal and Lyon. I'm starting to think about what it might be like to actually meet the people that I'm working with in person after a year of talking to each other. So feeling optimistic.
Cool, cool. Rachel.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. My name is Rachel Gardner. I'm working with Eric on a project called the People's Collaborative Governance Network. I'm excited to learn about all of your work today. I am, where am I today? I am looking forward to Monday. I get my second vaccine for COVID. And so like Matthew, I'm excited to be able to start seeing people that I've been working with for the last year, only on screen, to maybe start being able to see them in person.
Great. Nelly, you're up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nelly Rodriguez. I'm the technologist for the public realm with the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics at the City of Boston. I work with Matt sometimes there. And today I am very excited about expanding access to the internet today and every day in Boston. And I'm working with the Boston Public Library to bring outdoor Wi-Fi to a bunch of BPL branches across the city. And so while that's exciting from a digital equity perspective, it's also a great excuse for me to go test them out and work outside. So I'll probably do that after this session, go to my local BPL branch and test out in a purely professional capacity while also just taking advantage of the nice day we have.
Nice, nice, nice. Enjoy.
I love Fridays. That's where I'm at. It's a beautiful day in New Orleans. I'm Julia. I'm the CEO of IC Change. We are a community climate data and dialogue platform. And it is the last breath of spring, I'm going to guess, for our community before we go into what our virtual winter is, also known as summer here in New Orleans. Finishing up some proposals on heat and air quality and hoping I can land it for a nice Mother's Day.
Nice, 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 nice. So with that, as I said, everyone on the panel of the various programs that are represented here actually did a video ahead of time. So we're going to start rolling tape, and this is their introduction to the program, and then we'll get into our conversation. David? I think they're rolling. There we go.
Hi, my name is Matthew N.K. Smith, and I'm the Principal Data Scientist with the City of Boston. I work out of the Department of Innovation and Technology with the Analytics team, and we serve the city as a kind of data-driven task force, collaborating with partners from the Transportation Department to Housing to the Mayor's Office, you name it. But today, I'm going to talk about a partnership that the City of Boston has with two other cities, Montreal and the Metropole of Lyon, around the realm of mobility data, in particular, the sharing of mobility data and the challenges that arise there. So the City of Boston sees enormous value in the application of insights from mobility data. It can sort of allow us to look under the hood and better understand the way that our city and our people are connected, and what can be drivers of positive change, and of course, what are the obstacles that our constituents face. Many departments around Boston, from transportation to environment to our own team, we engage with mobility data on a daily basis. We recognize its power to improve key services for Bostonians and to take important action toward addressing climate change and improving sustainability. And of course, mobility data has also really shown how valuable it is with the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's obviously a direct measure of the way that the pandemic has changed the way cities operate. I'm showing here a collaboration that we have with the Boston Planning and Development Agency to track the visitors commuting to the city of Boston. You can really consider mobility data as a finger on the pulse of the recovery from the pandemic. So because it's such an important tool, it's really crucial for Boston and all cities to engage with it in a responsible way. And that's why we're really happy to be partnering with Montreal and the Metropole of Lyon to find this common ground, establish best practices. It's really helpful to see how our peer cities have managed the interests that make up the mobility data ecosystem. juggling the city's goals with the private sector data owners, the public, academic experts and advisors. For us, it's all about building a bond of mutual trust between all of these parties. So let's get into a little bit of the history of this collaboration. It dates back to 2015, when with the city of Lyon, Boston established this economic development MOU focused on tech sector jobs. And that went on and was formalized in 2017 with some EU funding out of the International Urban Cooperation that twinned the cities of Boston and Lyon and funded these 3 learning exchanges that allowed experts from each city to travel to the other one and learn about how they're dealing with some of the challenges around economic development. And that went on to bring in the city of Montreal in 2019 via the Moving On conference funded by Michelin. And there the focus was on autonomous vehicles. And that started to shift the interest more toward mobility data. And after that, that conference focused on autonomous vehicles, we broadened the scope of the collaboration between the 3 cities to really look at mobility data in general. And since that time, we've been building out these shared learnings and trying to formalize that in the form of a joint manifesto of sorts. So now I'm going to kind of walk through the way that we're trying to structure this collaboration in this joint manifesto, which at this point has 3 chapters that we're focused on. So the first chapter is on data access and governance. And in order to build out this chapter, we held a workshop out of the Moving On conference in 2020 that brought in stakeholders from each city's ecosystem to talk about the principles that govern data in the mobility realm. And we crystallized this data access and governance challenge around these 4 categories. The first is around data definitions. So it's enormously important to be clear and concise about the purpose of the data that you're using and what its scope is. Next, we needed to make sure that we're engaging all of the community stakeholders and making sure that the public is not being left out of the conversation. And that goes hand in hand with the third pillar there, which is trust, and ensuring that there are these mutual bonds of trust, both between cities and their constituents, their residents, but also with the the private sector partners, and ensuring that there's a bond of trust between them and the cities that they might be interested in sharing data with. And all of this kind of gets tied together into the important mission of establishing a governance framework for all of this work. And that brings me to the second chapter, which is really focused on data rights and ethics. And to build out this chapter, we had another workshop with the Centre Jacques Cartier in France that brought in more academic thought leaders to try to build this out. And we crystallized this around these 4 concepts. The first being data equity, understanding that it's really important that we use mobility data to close gaps in equity rather than perpetuating ongoing bias. Again, inclusion and access is an important part of this, and privacy is crucial anytime that you're talking about location data. And finally, the precautionary principle is the idea that you need to intend how you use mobility data rather than just allowing it to be used ad hoc at the drop of a hat. And then looking forward, finally, we have this chapter 3, which is about putting it into practice, supported by Soprasteria, which is a French digital transformation firm. And our goal is to leverage these 2 previous chapters, focused on the digital curb this time, to develop an experiment of sorts, to scope out the idea of doing a pilot or pilots in each of the 3 cities based on these principles and shared knowledge built up over the first 2 chapters. So what we've really taken away from this collaboration is that the 3 cities, of course, are facing a lot of the same challenges in the mobility data space. And it's enormously helpful to be able to talk cross-city about all of these challenges and develop the best practices together.
Hi, my name is Nelly Rodriguez, and today I'm going to talk to you about centering trust and privacy while collecting data in the public realm. I'm currently the technologist for the public realm with the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics at the City of Boston, where I lead experimentation, implementation, and critique of smart city projects using an approach to using technology that considers people first, builds trust, and enables civic action. And today I'll talk about one specific project that tried to achieve all of those things. This project began with the announcement of Boston's Healthy Streets program, which proposed accelerating several planned changes to Boston's streets to support a healthy reopening and equitable recovery from COVID-19. One of the primary values guiding healthy streets was safety, in the context of increasing safety for bicyclists and pedestrians. This got us thinking more broadly about what makes a street healthy for everyone, particularly in the context of technology, which captures data about the public realm. For many, surveillance technology and invasive data collection directly contributes to a decreased feeling of health and safety. So is there such a thing as healthy data collection without surveillance? To find out, we partnered with Numina Sensors for a 6-month pilot to understand the impacts of the Healthy Streets program. A secondary objective of the project was to understand if it was possible to gather useful, usable data on street-level activity using sensors that do not contribute to the surveillance of residents. Today, much of the data collected for transportation planning purposes involves storing visually identifiable images of faces and license plates. We chose Numina because of its privacy-first design approach, which uses computer vision instead of camera footage to right-size data collection. Raw data is processed on board the device and only transmits and stores anonymous, non-identifiable information. We installed 3 sensors at 3 very different locations: in the Seaport, downtown at a busy intersection next to the Boston Common, and at Jamaica Plain on the Southwest Corridor. We also wanted to use this project to address the fundamental challenge that digital data collection is largely invisible in the built environment. So we worked with a research team called Helpful Places to develop a digital signage system called DTPR, which stands for Digital Transparency in the Public Realm. DTPR is an open source communication standard for transparency and accountability around digital technology. Icons come together in the built environment to give high-level information to those interested. Scanning the QR code using a mobile phone opens a web application which contains even more details. The goal is that this signage increases transparency, accountability, and user agency with a standard set of concepts and icons that clearly communicate and describe digital systems. So with our sensors and our signage in place, we began receiving and visualizing the incoming data. The next step was to assess whether or not the data we were able to collect with these sensors aligned to the needs of our transportation planners. Many of the typical metrics gathered for a planning study were available to us even though we didn't collect or store any video footage. Some of these metrics included desire lines, which visualized the observed paths of pedestrians, bicyclists, cars, and buses, historical data for any time period over the data collection period, volume counts, and heat maps, which identified high traffic areas and bottlenecks. And all of this data is now owned by the city, so it will be made freely available to the public for download in multiple formats and through a variety of platforms. Overall, we learned that there was a new way to collect the minimum viable data required for many planning tasks, and we have more to do to make data collection more transparent, trustworthy, and useful to the public, not just experts. This project also reinforced something we already knew. Data can be used to plan and make large-scale engineering and design decisions, but it can also be used to tell stories. So now I'm going to take you through some of the stories that we've started to uncover in our data. We observed a story about how unsafe certain bike lanes are downtown. Right-turning trucks in particular created a safety issue for bicyclists, with activity peaking around 10 a.m. every day. This helped us advocate for the protected bike lanes and flex posts that you now see at Tremont and Boylston and other locations downtown, which deter turning movements and driver actions that have caused collisions and near misses in the past. We also learned about how long cars, buses, and trucks dwell at the curb. We were interested in this because of new curbside regulations that sought to reserve curb space in certain commercial areas for pickup, drop-off activity, either for rideshare or food delivery. We learned that most cars dwelled in this area for an average of 4.22 minutes at the curb, which confirmed that the regulations in place were appropriate, something we were able to reinforce through signage that suggested a 5-minute limit. One story we were very interested in was what, if anything, would impact residents' reliance on cars, and when did mode share meaningfully shift? Right away, when we were looking at the 6 months of data, there was one date in particular where pedestrian counts were abnormally high, nearly doubling or tripling the number of cars in some locations. Any guesses as to why? In addition to that day being a 74-degree weekend, it was also the day that the election was called. Starting at 11:30 a.m., which was roughly the time the results were announced, there was an exponential increase in pedestrian traffic and bikes. The downtown sensor alone observed 26,625 pedestrians, the highest number in a single hour of the entire study. There was another series of events that precipitated a significant mode shift, this time due to a sudden drop in the average number of daily car trips.
In almost every instance, whenever there was a snow emergency declared, our sensors recorded pedestrian traffic was barely impacted, with daily averages remaining roughly the same overall and exceeding car traffic, which was cut in half. We're still looking into some of these stories, and because the data set is now open, we hope you will as well. What's especially remarkable is the level of knowledge about what was happening on our streets that we were able to observe without capturing any visual images, which really questions the need for the so-called eyes on the street approach to data collection. So now we have some more things planned. This summer, 3 Numina sensors will be moved to study multiple Go Hubs in East Boston. Go Hubs are a new project from the Boston Transportation Department seeking to bring every home in Boston within a 10-minute walk of a rail station or key bus route, blue bike station, and car share. We're looking forward to understanding more about how and when people use these new spaces with data we feel is secure and private. I'll conclude this presentation with an invitation to the audience to explore the data that was collected for this project for your own interests, research, and advocacy. By opening up this data on the city's open data portal and partnering with local volunteer and advocacy organizations, we hope that we're able to enable deeper resident participation in local government. Thank you.
Hey y'all, my name is Julia Kamari Drapkin. I'm the CEO and founder of Change. Our technology, our business, and our innovations are grounded in our mission that everyday people have critical insights to see, measure, and co-create solutions for our changing climate. 100-year weather events are happening as often as every 2 to 3 years. They happen on my phone, just like that. Cities, engineers, utilities, and researchers are struggling to prioritize risks and target solutions, but they're relying on climate models, which means you're looking at risk like this. This is a flood map. Or this is an urban heat map sourced from cars driven around the city of New Orleans. Instead of looking at risk like this, with real people at the center of the process. And not understanding real climate risk is costly. Climate risk data, machine learning products, and even the next generation of satellite data, none of that is validated, real-time, or granular enough for planning solutions. Beyond the data, our clients are also struggling with public engagement around these risks, which erodes public trust and misses valuable insights. Change's dialogue and data platform lets municipalities, utilities, engineers, and researchers collaborate with the public, providing the missing data, insights, and trust needed to make the right investments in the right places. Change helps focus efforts across all 3 critical aspects of addressing our changing climate: understanding climate risk, mitigating it, and dealing with it, also known as adapting. No 2 communities' problems are exactly the same, but generating insights in partnership with residents can scale when using our platform across multiple climate risks. First, we recruit observers, and we target critical areas of focus. We send proactive notifications about real climate and weather events, and residents are tracking those impacts, adding photos and sharing solution details alongside hyper-local data measurements. Change analyzes and aggregates the data into actionable insights alongside third-party data and models. Even the simplest posts generate a wealth of information, and we can sync each post to local weather and sensor networks for additional layers of context and validation. Here are a few examples of our platform in action. For flooding in New Orleans, we recruited diverse residents in specific neighborhoods. We quadrupled public participation compared to traditional engagement efforts and documented 29 flood events that showed that flood models were underestimating impacts in this low-income neighborhood. We saved our clients $600,000 in redesign fees, and we reallocated $4.8 million to this HUD-funded infrastructure project using Change data. We've gone from a nice to have to a need to have service, according to the engineers who work with us. Our recent work on health and heat and energy efficiency improvements in low-income neighborhoods has gained tremendous traction. We demonstrated that the National Weather Service is under-alerting residents about heat risks in certain neighborhoods, and that highly targeted interventions can generate both emissions reductions as well as non-energy health benefits. Change can be used on climate action and energy efficiency planning efforts. We have air quality and wildfire early warning products in R&D. And alongside our flooding work, we can track a number of real-time coastal changes, such as harmful algae blooms, erosion, and co-designed for planned retreat and carbon mitigation development projects. These are some of the regions IC Change is already in or expanding to this year. And one of those regions is Greater Boston, thanks to our working partnership with the Museum of Science, who's been using IC Change in their environmental literacy work with a special focus in Greater Boston. We helped with the Wicked Hot Boston project in 2019, the Wicked High Tide project in 2020, and this summer we'll be helping with the Wicked Hot Mystic project in partnership with the Mystic River Watershed Association. That's going to be focusing on heat. Alongside flooding and heat, the climate conversation is extremely well-rounded. In Greater Boston, we track fall colors, spring blooms, drought, trees, allergies, changes in gardens, and coastal changes. Variety is also critical for understanding how these events relate over time, as you can see in the dialogue here, because that's how people learn. IC Change has proven to have quantifiable educational value to our users who are managing their own risks and learning in real time as they observe their own backyards. IC Change hosts a global community across 118 countries, but our targeted work is co-designed in partnership with our clients. That includes municipalities, engineers, utilities, and researchers who want to turn community experiences into solutions. Our team includes an award-winning mix of journalists, user experience designers, engineers, data scientists, social scientists, urbanists, and we welcome dialogue with leaders like you who understand that truly smart, resilient communities are centered around its smartest, most resilient sensors, people. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Gordon, and I am a visiting professor in the Comparative Media Studies Department at MIT and a professor of media arts at Emerson College and the director of the Engagement Lab. And I'm here to talk to you about a project that we have been working on over the last year or so in Boston. It's called the People's Collaborative Governance Network. The People's Collaborative Governance Network is formed as an urban living laboratory, and it's focused on imagining novel collaborative governance structures in Boston. In other words, we're building a network to ask, how are decisions made in the city, by whom, and for what? And we're designing interventions in the form of projects and prototypes to advance this conversation.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel Gardner. It's great to be here with you. I am helping to coordinate this effort, the People's Collaborative Governance Network, along with Eric. So I want to just give a little bit of background to how this project came to be. So in 2018, I was invited to work with City Councilor Andrea Campbell to help her team at City Hall rethink their district level civic engagement strategy. She wanted to go beyond the traditional methods of engagement with constituents and really explore ways to more deeply support resident leadership and engage constituents in policymaking. So during that time, I conducted a series of interviews with the most civically engaged constituents to better understand their own barriers and challenges related to their leadership. And we learned that leaders, even though not very geographically distant, were largely operating in silos and not benefiting from the knowledge and experiences of others tackling similar issues around them. So we developed a year-long civic empowerment series that was really designed to facilitate connection and learning for leaders in District 4, which is mostly Dorchester and Mattapan. And it was then that the counselor and I as well caught a vision for a larger initiative that might help government to better equip civic leaders for resident-led change making. And so together we organized and hosted the Boston Civic Leaders Summit in 2019. And this was designed to bring together resident leaders from all over the city. And again, there through that initiative, which engaged about 350 residents, we again learned that grassroots level innovation and organizing is largely disconnected, that leaders are doing great work on the ground, but they don't have ways of learning from one another to better support their work. And we also clearly saw that government has so much to learn from these groups that are addressing needs and advocating for change on the ground. But even the most committed elected and government officials lack the mechanisms to support that cross-learning?
And there's been a lot of lip service paid to better community engagement and better community consultation. But at the end of the day, community engagement and consultation is surface level. Often what happens is that government institutions do a lot of listening, but they actually have no capacity to, in fact, act on anything that they've been able to hear. They have a lot of data that's brought in through public participation processes. Once that data is brought in, they tend to make decisions in precisely the way that they've made them in the past. And this is what we wanted to address. As Rachel said, we understand that there's an incredible amount of learning taking place that is possible on both sides, on the side of the community and on the side of government. And we wanted to understand what those mechanisms might be to bring those together. And we wanted to move away from tokenistic consultation. Sherry Arnheim has written about in her now famous ladder of participation. We wanted to actually move to collaboration and community empowerment as a way of thinking about what might be possible within the city. So we did this in a number of ways. This project started as a co-design class that I taught at MIT, and out of that class we had 11 community leaders that came in as partners in that class. Rachel was part of that class to help help coordinate and sort of imagine what these projects could do and what students can do with these community leaders. And we ended up building the kernel of the network that we now call the People's Collaborative Governance Network. And I'm going to hand it over to Rachel to talk about how we've structured that network post the class last semester.
Yeah, so we knew that in order to be driven by equity, that this had to be structured in a way that was rooted and led by community, not governed by an institution or by government, but largely by community with support of government, university, private sector, where the community can really set the agenda. And so the first step to doing this was to establish a core team to guide the development of the network. So we brought on 12 core team members, or 14 if you include Eric and myself, 6 that represented community organizations, grassroots efforts, and 6 that represented government departments or elected officials. This core team developed a set of values and agreements in order to establish a collaborative governance structure for themselves that preferences community experience, questions the status quo, recognizes power and position as individuals and representatives of institutions, individual and institutional positionality and privilege, and that really leans into the spicy conversations, as we've come to call them. And also an emphasis on recognizing and dealing with institutional harm where it has happened. Eric, you want to talk a little bit about how we're developing this network out of the core team and what we're doing with it?
Yes, we're already past our 6 minutes, so I will very briefly say that that what we're trying to do in this initiative is to create a learning culture within the city. We want to create a culture of experimentation and discovery that will allow for people both within government and outside of government to collaborate with one another to actually create new mechanisms for decision making. So we're interested in specifically intervening in how decisions get made within the city, how data and information get taken in, and how and why it's trusted, and then understanding that through a series of projects, which we don't have time to get into now. But ultimately, what I think we've created is the social infrastructure that's grounded in trust, that builds on the kind of relational innovation that's necessary for governments and the cities that they serve to be able to actually create sort of just and equitable futures. Thank you so much for listening.
I think we're back. Those were absolutely great. It was wonderful to hear about all the different projects and the work you're doing. Excuse me, I'm a little dry here. And we don't have a lot of time, and so we won't be able to kind of talk about each one particular, but there are a couple of things that are emerging for me that I would just kind of like to throw out there. And, let's make sure we leave space for everyone to either respond or have something to say about this. But we live in a different America now, one in which trust is really been eroded in public institutions and everything. And yet a lot of what you're doing, some of it very specifically, Eric and Rachel talked about trying to work on trust, but the underlying pieces, that there's all this data, there's all this information, things that are being gathered. Just like, how are you dealing with the kind of fracture of trust in our society, and then the need to use data that's really being collected across society for people to believe that, yeah, you get it right, you're doing okay, you know, we really believe in what you're doing. And then the other part I want to say, and this is the second part of that, and this is actually inspired by something you showed, Nayeli, which was, at what point in collecting data can we be transparent about what's going on? So any one of those two.
I'm glad that you liked that that aspect of the project, Caesar. I agree that the issue of trust, especially when it comes to trust about digital systems and data collection, is really challenging, and something I think that we're still very much not decided on our approach. I think what you saw there was one attempt of many attempts to try something and see if people responded to it and see if it would work. But it is an incomplete attempt, and something that I think, you know, we wouldn't say that's like the solution or the only way to do things. And I will say that one strong conclusion that we all came to after deploying that system of signage is that, you know, transparency is sort of the first thing that we should aspire to, but beyond that is actually building systems to hold ourselves accountable. Because just because we create the opportunity to share data or to make systems transparent doesn't mean that they're actually accessible, and doesn't mean that people are actually able to use them to hold us accountable to our word when we say that we're protecting privacy or that we're not surveilling people. So, you know, this was the first step, but we acknowledge, I think, that there's aspirations beyond that, and that would be, you know, accountability, and also, you know, really building user agency to, you know, take these systems into their own hands and use them for the advocacy or research that they need, not just what the city thinks is important.
Yeah, that was an open question to all of you, and you can feel free to jump in at any point in time when you've got it. And I can't tell. Go ahead.
I could follow in. Just, I think, just on what Nayeli is saying, which, by the way, I did love that project, Nayeli. It's really cool. But I think that, you know, the way we handle it is we think trust and transparency are intimately related. I think those two questions are intimately related. So what we do is we basically, when you sign into IC Change, and you're signing in with one of our partners, like whether it's the City of Miami or Museum of Science in Boston or kind of the Health Department in New Orleans, we say very upfront, like, we're sharing this data with this partner to try and make a solution for you. And it's, you know, like signposting it very upfront. People are asked to volunteer their location data per post, and that not only tells, you know, is a voluntary act. We're not scraping it from your phone, but we're actually getting better data, because often people can be posting from places where they're not physically located, and it messes up when you scrape Twitter or whatever the social media is, because they're not designed for that. And so we're actually getting better at more accurate data and more details. And then with our kind of our client side version of IC Change, which we are kind of, which we did in co-design with a lot of our kind of the groups that we work with, the educators, the cities and utilities, and the engineers, is this idea of like signposting that the users that you've seen their data and that you're using it, and thanking them for that. And doing that at scale is really challenging. So we're developing ways for, like, with quick buttons for people to be able to say, actually, that was really useful, and we're going to take that into consideration in design, or we're going to send out a backtrack or whatever, so that people, the residents, actually say, oh wow, that was helpful. And then it encourages that behavior, and also encourages the kinds of posts that, you know, city governments find useful. So really, you know, creating that dialogue and trust, and actually generating better results.
I like what you're saying there, Julia, about a dialogue. I think that in terms of the collaboration with our partner cities in Canada and France, we're seeing a lot of similar problems related to this tied together issue of transparency and trust. And the common feeling among all of the cities is that we need to do more as far as improving the agency of the communities that are involved in a potential situation where privacy could be breached, or in generally not understanding the way that that data is being used in our open spaces. And that kind of dialogue you're talking about is really important to that feeling of agency, where you can build up the trust as long as the folks that are being impacted by this data collection feel like they have a say.
And I'll just add to that. One of the challenges that we see is not just in how data is used that's already been collected, but what data is being collected to begin with. And sometimes the data that's being collected is not the data that's meaningful for the people that the data is being collected for. So we're seeing this through the network. We've been doing some work around emergency food provision in the city of Boston, and understanding the disparities between the data that's being collected on the mutual aid level versus the data that's being collected by the city or even the nonprofit sector, as it pertains to food insecurity and who needs it, and what the issues are. And in some cases, what we're seeing is that on the local level, there's a much deeper kind of qualitative understanding of the issues, obviously. And then on the city level, there's a broader overview of what the issues are, but that sort of deep local understanding isn't there, and there aren't the mechanisms really to translate from one to the other, because the city can't hear the qualitative stuff. Sometimes for purposes of liability, and sometimes just for unwillingness, and then the communities don't want to deal with the top level stuff, right? It doesn't seem relevant, and so I think the question of this matter of dialogue is so important in every step of the data process, from collection to use to analysis. To really sort of engage people early on, and to develop what we've been calling these collaborative data protocols. So can we sort of create a set of rules that would exist across the sort of data lifespan for communities and municipal actors?
I'll just add to that quickly.
Yes.
Just quickly, Eric said it well. Just what we're learning in working deeply with our community partners is that it needs to go beyond transaction, right? Trust is not a transactional thing. It's not you put this in and you get trust out, but it really is, it's relational. And so even when it feels, even though that's hard, it's hard work. And so this dialogue and anything that is helping to build that relationship and helping people to feel like they are invested from as early as possible in whatever the project is critical.
And all of these efforts, one thing, and we were just touching on it, is that we really, in order to understand what's going on in any place, we have to rely on really different kinds of data that come from different forms. And some of those can be the data, people's experiences and dialogues. Some of those can be measurements we've taken. And of course, we need to have these conversations with people so people can, between sectors and between organizations and different viewpoints. And then we have these, like I said, these other kind of data and allowing people to understand what those are. But at some point, somewhere, someone is making sense of all of that. So where does that happen? How does that happen? And how do we, what's the big problem we're trying to solve there? I mean, what's the breakthrough you've made on that? Or what are the challenges you see we still have to deal with? Or how do we do sense making across all of this stuff?
I think one challenge that I will speak to, or like another aspiration that I have, is not only to have the city be better at processing or understanding and intaking the qualitative data like Eric was talking about before. I think we need to do a better job of that, and should, and are interested in lots of ways to doing that. I guess I also wish that we had a better ability as members of the community to, I guess, push back on some of the assumptions or some of the sense making that the so-called experts are doing with this quantitative data, because you know, for better or for worse, right now, a lot of decisions are made on that basis. And I feel like a lot of times that expertise is used to shut down really legitimate pushback that communities might have just by, you know, pointing to a quantitative study or pointing to data. And then that sort of shuts down the conversation because not everybody can engage with the data at that, like, you know, with that vocabulary. And so I wish that we spent more time and resources building that capacity in communities so that when experts, ourselves included, try to pivot back to the data because that's our comfort zone, that the communities in those conversations could say, well, actually, we have that same language and we have that same vocabulary, and we're going to meet you on that level. You know, I think we need to bring ourselves to the quantitative conversation, but we also need to make sure that we're investing in the ability of communities to bring themselves to the, qualitative and quantitative.
Yes.
What I'm saying.
Yes, we got it.
I can follow that, Nelly. I think I'm just gonna come after you every time. So one of the things that, you know, IC Change is innovative around is the syncing of qualitative and quantitative data as a singular product. Like, we collect both from the community, and that allows us to enter the conversations around modeling, that allows us to enter and have and be taken seriously in technical conversations, whether it's with cities or engineers, because we can actually look at the data and sync it to the quote unquote, you know, their source of truth on both sides of the equation, both with the user community, the residents, the public, and with the not the engineers as much, but the cities, particularly the decision makers. We have to do a major and where we've had breakthroughs is in these kind of community meetings where both get to come together and look at the data that's been collected. We have to do education on the fact that a data model is not truth. A data model is our best guess. And often residents have, you know, ground truth and proven the model's wrong. We've seen that happen for our heat work. We've seen that happen with our flooding work. And, you know, do the math on climate models. And, you know, there's a lot of error in the system. Even with the next generation satellites and sensors, there's errors. So, you know, really doing the education, saying like, we can work together to make the data much better and more accurate and more meaningful to us in terms of the qualitative data and insights we bring to the table in our daily lives. So if you're going to solve this problem, taking into account our experiences. So, you know, elderly residents having heat strokes in their front yards, maintaining their gardens, when green infrastructure is planned and there's no maintenance planned for that. Right? That's a conversation, and that's one that can be taken seriously when the anecdotes are matched with that data, and we can all come to the table with the same information. But it does require education on both sides of the equation, and it's been very powerful to actually have the engineers validate it. They actually will say, actually, yeah, the first point of failure in a hydrology is a model, and yet that's where we make most of our decisions.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that. I mean, so I've been doing some research with municipal decision makers around like how they're using data and how they're thinking about data. And what's super interesting and perhaps a little bit optimistic is that you know, what I'm hearing from people is that people who work for city governments is that they understand the limitations of data for the most part, right? Like, people understand that data sets are incomplete. People understand that there's bias in these data sets. So that's great. That's like the first part of the problem, is that there's a general understanding from many people within city governments. I mean, not to mention the, you know, city government representations here on this panel, but even beyond you, there is an understanding of this that seems to be fairly widespread. And the challenge is that the mechanisms by which they make decisions are the same, even though the individual actors understand the problems, right? So it's often that the still sort of the processes of decision making and the sort of bureaucratic entanglements of decision making are still the same, but individuals understand that, oh, okay, this is incomplete, this is biased, but we still have to make the decision in the way that we've done it. And so I think we have an opportunity to sort of take that perhaps new awareness that decision makers have, and start actually thinking about the processes of decision making within government to do all the things that Julia was just mentioned and Ayali had mentioned, of actually sort of generating that kind of sort of moving that understanding to actual dialogue and process and policy, hopefully.
Matt, are we stepping all over your ground here? You want to?
No, yeah, I think that what Eric just said about moving the needle that we're at toward process and executing on this rather than just having a mutual understanding, that's something that resonates. And maybe I don't have something quite as optimistic or positive to add. I think this is something that internally at the City of Boston we feel very heavily, is that there's a trade-off here where if we want to be supplying systems in a way that is effective and efficient for our constituents, there's a perception within all of that bureaucratic inertia that you're sacrificing some of that ability in order to get that higher engagement. And that's something that I think on an individual level, we really try to push back on, that you can make gains in terms of effectiveness and even efficiency when you more fully understand the problem, and getting that qualitative understanding tied to the quantitative understanding that maybe we typically tend to leverage for our decision making, that is important, and that's something that will actually serve us well. But as the folks have already said in the last few minutes, there's a trade-off that's perceived, I think, among decision makers there, and that's something that's really hard to get past.
No,
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please. Yes.
Sorry. So, in terms of that perception, if you have use cases that demonstrate that's not the case, that there's plenty of technology allowing engagement to happen in a very efficient way and potentially even making the solutions more efficient, how would you suggest, approaching that perception or changing that perception?
I think that there's a culture shift that is kind of already happening to a certain extent. So the good news is that to some degree, it's just a matter of time. But a more active approach might be that the storytelling component of this, I think, is really important, and the way that we can the demonstration of that kind of effectiveness that you're talking about, Julia, it needs to reach the right people. So I would love to see action and activity directed toward the storytelling of situations in which access to that more ground truth, community level, qualitative perspective is allowed to percolate upward to the eyes that need to see it. Yeah.
So, we're getting close to the end, unfortunately, because I think we could go longer and deeper. So I have one question for each of you. You can give you like 30 seconds to answer it, and I'll give you 15 seconds to collectively think about it. 30 seconds each to answer it. But I'd like you to kind of just kind of look out into the future and thinking about the work you have now, and just like, what's the questions that at the edge of your work? It's kind of like, yeah, here's where we are, but boy, if we could just kind of move on this question, things could go a lot better. So like, what's that question that's really kind of like at the edge of your work? Maybe it's not a question, maybe it's just a thought, but something that's out there that when you look at your work and you look at where you're going, it would just really be helpful to kind of know more about, understand better. Yeah. And this is your 15 minutes, 15 seconds of silence and work. And now it's time to start. Who's going to start us off? Rachel, thank you.
Oh, Rachel.
Yeah, I'll start. And actually, I'm looking at the questions in the chat, and one of those really rose to the surface for me. And my interest is definitely lies in community agency. And one of the questions in the chat here is, how do we enable resident agency at scale? And I think that's something that's of critical importance to our work. Like we really believe strongly in community voice and experience being centered in decision making. And how do you do that in a way that actually is able to that's at scale, and not just those with the loudest voices or the most time to show up and let their voices be heard are the ones who are influencing decision making, but really how do we reach those populations that don't have the time or the language access or digital access or whatever that access is, right? And really being able to do that at scale so that it's true community participation and leadership, and not just the loudest and easiest to access.
Julie, you want to go? You were going to jump in there. So.
Yeah, Rachel, we can definitely talk about those questions anytime. But I think on the edge of my brain, you're asking me to look out, which is like, I rarely get to do that, but reflection is critical, right? We're really after paradigm shift. That's really what our goal is as a company, as an organization. And we're wanting, on the edge of my mind is like wanting to know how far we can push it. When we put our attention towards a specific impact that is really impacting community, and then we really spend the time on developing the processes and the technology to solve it, we hit it out of the park. And I want to know how far I really sincerely want to know how far this can go, like in everything that we've tried. So, beyond the climate impacts, like designing for the future with, of carbon, zero or carbon negative, and making sure that the people who are least heard have an opportunity to participate, and it's not a tax on their time, but rather a badge of pride. Like being civically engaged didn't really happen for me as a human, as a person, until I had a mortgage and a kid in school, and and even understanding what how powerful city council is. Like there's this level of engagement at the very at all tails of society, where we can make engaging with your community and your government to make a solution is the thing, is as cool as your TikTok video.
Yeah, yes.
That's my dream. So.
Thanks. So before they kick us out, Eric, Matthew, and then Naida.
Yeah, let me follow up on that. So I'll just say that for me, for the most of my academic career, I've focused on what I've liked to call the sort of front end of participation. I've been really interested in sort of creative and effective modes of public engagement. What has occurred to me recently, and why my work has shifted to these questions of collaborative governance, and I've immersed myself into that research space, is that the question is not so much how do we get more input, but the question is how do we change the logics by which institutions take in that input and make decisions. And unless we do that, and I think this is the paradigm shift that Julia is talking about, unless we do that, then more input is not going to lead us anywhere. More data is not going to be good for us. And so I'm very invested in that question, and it actually does keep me up at night. How do we change the logics? How do we change the mechanisms of decision making?
I guess I'm maybe going to shift gears here a little bit, but the burning question at the top of my mind when I think about the larger scale commonalities between even on the country level, between different cities around the world that are facing a lot of these same challenges that we've been talking about today. There are standards, especially data-driven standards, that are popping up everywhere, saying we should do this, governments should have these regulations. Academic partners are coming up with all kinds of rules and guidelines and frameworks, and it's become a very messy space. And it's very difficult to weigh in this space without feeling like you're just adding one more framework or one more rule to a long list that already exists. And from a policymaking perspective, it's really challenging to know where to look and who to pay attention to. So, I guess what I'm thinking about at the highest level is how do we get some kind of, crystallize some truth from all of that mess? And is there any way that we can have a gold standard or have some kind of guiding principle that elevates above that mess of more specific standardization, and especially in the data space.
Thank you. And Nayeli, you get to close us out.
I can be brief. I just have 2 words, and that's climate resilience. We've been visualizing climate data for a while now, and there's some really cool stuff out there. And Julia, you're definitely a part of that. Your organization is, but none of it seems to be really getting through in any kind of dramatic way, or way that's talk about paradigm shifting the way that communities and governments are responding to climate change. And making communities more resilient. So I'm really looking forward to anything that disrupts that space and makes climate resilience more accessible and more actionable, because it's really important.
Thank you. Eric, Rachel, Matthew, and Irene, Julia, thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking with you, presentations. David, thank you for your guidance. And I think with that, we'll let you all go and send people off to the next session. David?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your amazing work. We thank you for joining the BARI conference this year, and we hope that you're able to continue with us over the next couple of weeks and joining our next session next week in our topical panels as well. We thank you all, and you guys have a great weekend.
Take care. Bye-bye.